On one of our many visits over to East Tennessee, we were fortunate to be able to sit down and talk with Harry Kidwell. You see, Harry was one of the original members of the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company Museum. The museum got its start with the acquisition of a locomotive that sat rusting in the weeds in neighboring North Carolina. Harry tells us about finding and moving the locomotive and not only starting a museum, but preserving an important icon of the mountain culture that predates the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Thank you, Harry. So what was the significance of this particular Shea engine?
It's the only one that was remaining of the Shays that actually worked inside the national park. We used to have a Chamber of Commerce in Townsend, and at one of our annual meetings, George Morrison and Don Story showed up, and George had learned about this locomotive, which was over at Graham County Railroad. George found out they were getting ready to scrap the locomotive. In researching, he found out this also was the only remaining Shay that had worked for the Little River Lumber Company in the Smoky Mountain National Park. So that was what started it, and then there were several little meetings around different places. They formed the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company as a not-for-profit corporation. Then we started figuring out where to get the money. Then the other thing that they was concerned about was where would they put it. I think we were about ready to give up on it, and Paul Maples offered this piece of land. That kind of solved the problems to a point. The other one was where would we get the funds to pay for it. So he financed it over a period of time, and I'll be honest with you, I don't remember how long it was. So that was when actually the corporation was formed, and we really got active on it and started trying to raise money. George had contacted them and made arrangements for us to get the locomotive. We would go over on Saturdays and start taking parts off of that locomotive, the drive gear and so forth, because we couldn't move it with that on. And we did that, I'm going to say, about every Saturday for 6 weeks. Jim Goddard was really very active in putting this program together, and I think he was the one that contacted the people at Vulcan Materials and Alcoa. Vulcan, number one, for the low boy.
What is a low boy? What is that?
That is a piece of heavy equipment trailer. It's the one, you know, that has the dip in it and then the hind wheels come up. They surveyed the best way to get it here. They ruled out 129 because the trailer would bottom out going over the tops of some of those hills. The only other option that was viable was to take 64 across through Ducktown, down to Coe and into Cleveland and pick up Interstate 40, or 75 rather, and come up here. You just don't move stuff on Thanksgiving weekend without pulling some strings. And I don't know who pulled those, but anyhow, the governor of North Carolina and the governor of Tennessee signed waivers to allow us to move that stuff.
Was that Lamar Alexander?
Sure was. Local boy.
Yeah. That may be why.
And I don't remember who the governor of North Carolina was, but you know, you can figure it out. Jim Goddard, I think, was the one who made arrangements for somebody over there with a backhoe to go down and dig a ramp so that they could back the low boys in right at the end of the track where this engine was sitting along the highway, so that we could tie the rails together and then just pull it right straight on to the low boy, and the tank and the caboose went on the other trailer. And it worked just slick as a whistle. But today we went over there, gosh, we had a bunch of people. Even Dean Stone from the newspaper was with us. And I remember we was carrying a rail, and Dean wanted to do his part, and he grabbed hold of the other end of the rail tong that I had. And there were about 6 of us on the end of that thing. We moved the rail that we needed to get it down there, and so everybody participated in it. And then when we loaded that, then they pulled it out and backed the other trailer in and loaded the tank and the caboose on it. And I think it was around 2:30 in the afternoon when we left down there. We got as far as Ducktown, and one of the wheel bearings went bad in one of the trailers. And so it got to smoking and squealing, and they decided they had to fix that before we went any farther. So the option was, at that point in time, it was probably around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they just decided it'd be a good time to put up for the night. And of course, then the next morning, we got started and went on into Cleveland and up Interstate 40 and then on into here. All the bridges and low-hanging wires and things posed problems. But Jim Wilsford had his pickup truck fitted with a pole that was the same height above the road as the stack on the engine. And Bob Hammond was riding with him, and they stayed in front of us, and any time they came to any sort of an obstacle that could pose a problem, they would let us know, and we were working with CB radios. And he would tell us, he needed to check the bridge, and sometimes we would have to. But we stopped somewhere, and I think that was probably down around Sweetwater, the truck stop. And there was a highway patrolman come in after us, and I mean, he was out for blood. He wasn't who gave us the authority to be hauling that stuff on a weekend. So I think it was Jim had those permits, and he showed them to him, and when you got something with the governor of North Carolina and governor of Tennessee's signature, you don't say anything else. So, there was a lot of people and a lot of things that had to take place. Jim Goddard got a portable air compressor and hooked it to the back of his truck. George Morrison had an old steam whistle, and he hooked it to the air compressor. And coming up the valley from Maryville up here, he would that air compressor couldn't hardly keep enough air going for George to keep blowing the whistle. So many people, you drive through areas, and with this being a national park, you don't think about what existed before the park did.